Everyone thought Jim Bob Duggar was untouchable, not just powerful. Untouchable. A man who didn't just build a family, he built a brand. A carefully crafted image of perfection. Faith, control, obedience, all packaged and sold to millions. For years, nothing could break him. Not the scandals. Not the accusations. Not even the conviction that should have destroyed everything. 2015 came, and he survived. 2021 came, and he survived again. Every time the world thought, this is it, this is the end, Jim Bob found a way to tighten his grip even more. Behind the scenes, it wasn't just a family anymore. It was a system built on silence, on pressure, on fear, non-disclosure agreements, financial dependence, emotional manipulation, every piece carefully placed so no one could step out of line without consequences. And for a long time, it worked, until March 2026. Because Joseph Duggar's arrest didn't just shake the family, it cracked the foundation. And this time, something felt different. This wasn't just another scandal to manage. This wasn't something that could be quietly buried or spun into a softer narrative. This was a breaking point, because for the first time, the silence didn't hold. The people who once stayed quiet didn't stay quiet anymore. The children who grew up inside that system, the ones who managed to escape it, started speaking. Not carefully, not indirectly, but openly, and with purpose. And suddenly, the story changed. Jill didn't hesitate. Within hours, she made her position clear. No vague words, no careful phrasing. She stood firmly on one side, and it wasn't Joseph's. It was the victim's. And that matters more than people realize, because Jill knows exactly what it feels like to not be protected. To have your pain minimized. To be told to stay quiet for the sake of family. But this time, she refused, and once that door opened, it didn't close. Jinga followed. Her words weren't loud, but they were powerful. There was heartbreak in what she said, but also clarity. Her concern wasn't about reputation. It wasn't about damage control. It was about the person who was hurt. And then others started stepping forward. One by one, voices that had once been controlled started slipping out of that control. Statements came out. Reactions came out. And for the first time, it wasn't unified. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't managed. It was fractured. And that fracture exposed everything, because now there are two sides. On one side, the ones who broke free. The ones who are choosing truth, even if it means tearing down everything they were raised to protect. And on the other side, the ones still inside the system. Still following the same script that's been used for years. Deny, minimize, deflect. Jim Bob's response. Carefully vague, carefully controlled, just enough emotion to appear concerned, but never enough to actually take a stand. And that silence speaks louder than anything else. Because this pattern, it's not new. It's the same strategy that's been used again and again. When something surfaces, don't confront it directly. Don't acknowledge the full truth. Control the narrative and hope it fades. But this time, it's not fading even from prison. Support for Joseph surfaced from within the same circle. Claims of false accusations, attempts to shift the story, to create doubt. But something isn't working anymore, because too many people are talking. And when enough people start talking, patterns start to appear. And that's where things get dangerous, because now, this isn't just about one arrest. It's about what that arrest represents. Insiders are starting to connect dots that were never meant to be connected. Stories that were once isolated are now being compared. Details that didn't make sense before are starting to align. And when that happens, the focus shifts away from just the individuals and toward the system that allowed it all to happen. For years, Jim Bob maintained control by keeping people separated, isolated, dependent, silent. But now, those same people are finding each other. They are talking, they are sharing, they are backing each other up. And that's something no amount of control can stop. Because once people realize they are not alone, fear loses its power. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. There are reports of more investigations. Quiet ones, but real ones. Not just looking at what happened recently, but looking backwards, years back. Trying to understand whether this was ever just a series of isolated incidents, or something much deeper. And when multiple situations point back to the same environment, the questions get bigger, much bigger, because then it's no longer about what happened. It becomes about who allowed it to happen. And all roads lead to the same place. The man at the top, the man who built the system, the man who controlled the narrative for decades, and now might be losing that control, Because the image is breaking. For years, the Duggar family presented something very specific to the world. Clean. Perfect. Untouchable. But perfection doesn't crack like this, unless something real is underneath it. And now, that reality is starting to show messy, complicated, uncomfortable and impossible to hide. This isn't just a scandal anymore. It's a shift. A moment where everything that was carefully held together is starting to fall apart. And the most unsettling part, we still don't know how deep it goes, because the question is no longer is the truth coming out. That part is already happening. The real question now is, how much of it has been hidden for all these years, and how much of it is still waiting to be exposed? Everyone thought they knew the Duggar story. A big family, strong values, a father who built everything from nothing, and protected it at all costs. But what if that story was never real? What if everything people believed about Jim Bob Duggar was carefully controlled from the very beginning? Because for years, he didn't just lead a family, he controlled it. Every decision, every relationship, every word that reached the outside world. And anyone who stepped out of line paid the price. That's why, for so long, nothing truly broke through. Not the whispers, not the allegations, not even the scandals that should have ended everything. Back in 2015, when the first major controversy hit, people thought that was the moment the truth would finally come out. It didn't. Instead, the narrative was managed, statements were controlled, and the family stayed united, at least on the surface. Then came 2021. This time, it was bigger, more serious, impossible to ignore, and yet, somehow, Jim Bob still held everything together. Or at least, that's what it looked like, because behind closed doors, things were already starting to shift. Trust was breaking, questions were growing, and cracks were forming in places no one could see. But even then, no one expected what would happen next. March 2026. That's when everything changed, because Joseph Duggar's arrest didn't just add another scandal to the list. It triggered something far more dangerous, something Jim Bob couldn't control. For the first time, the silence broke, and it didn't just break quietly, it shattered. The people who had spent years staying quiet, protecting the family, protecting the image, suddenly weren't protecting it anymore. They were exposing it, and it started fast. Within hours, the reactions began. Not the usual carefully worded statements, not the vague expressions of concern. This time, it was different. It was direct. It was emotional, and it made one thing very clear. The loyalty that once held this family together was gone, because Jill Duggar didn't hesitate. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't follow the usual script. She spoke out, and she made her position clear, not on the side of family, not on the side of reputation, but on the side of the victim. And that single decision changed everything. Because Jill isn't just another family member speaking out. She's someone who knows exactly what happens when the truth gets buried. She's lived it. She knows what it feels like to be told to stay quiet, to protect something bigger than yourself. And this time, she refused. And once that line was crossed, others started following. Jim Duggar came forward next. Not with anger, but with something deeper: disappointment, heartbreak, and a quiet but undeniable shift in where her loyalty stood. Because her focus wasn't on defending Joseph. It wasn't on protecting the family image. It was on acknowledging the harm, and that alone spoke volumes. Then more voices joined in. One by one. Some expected, some surprising, but all pointing in the same direction. Something was wrong, and more importantly, something had been wrong for a long time. Because this wasn't just about one moment. It wasn't just about one arrest. It was about a pattern. A pattern that people inside the family were finally starting to recognize and speak about. And once multiple people start telling similar stories, it becomes a lot harder to dismiss them. A lot harder to control the narrative. And that's exactly where things begin to fall apart, because now, for the first time ever, the Duggar family isn't presenting a united front. It's divided. On one side, the ones who broke free, the ones who are choosing to speak, even if it means exposing everything they were raised to protect. And on the other side, the ones still holding on to the system, still following the same rules, still protecting the same person, still staying silent. And that divide, it's more dangerous than any scandal, because it exposes the truth that's been hidden for years. This was never just a family. It was control, and now, that control is slipping. And this is where everything starts to get uncomfortable, because once the family split became visible, people started asking a different kind of question. Not what happened this time, but how many times has this happened before? And that question, that's the one Jim Bob Duggar can't control, because the more people talk, the more patterns start to appear, and right now, that's exactly what's happening behind the scenes. Former insiders aren't staying quiet anymore. People who once protected the family are now stepping back and looking at everything differently. They're remembering things, conversations, situations, moments that didn't feel right at the time, but were ignored, and now, when those moments are compared, they start to connect, because Joseph's arrest doesn't look isolated anymore. It looks like part of something bigger, something that's been building for years. Allegations that were once dismissed are being brought up again. Stories that were once buried are being re-examined. And when multiple people start describing similar experiences, it stops sounding like coincidence. It starts sounding like a pattern. And patterns, they lead somewhere, usually straight to the top, because systems like this don't exist without structure. They don't survive for decades without someone maintaining control. And that's where the focus is shifting now, away from just Joseph and toward the environment that allowed everything to happen. For years, Jim Bob kept that environment tightly controlled. Financially, by making sure dependence was never broken. Emotionally, by reinforcing loyalty over truth. And publicly, by controlling exactly what the world was allowed to see. It was calculated, and it worked, until now, because something has changed. The people who were once isolated aren't isolated anymore. They are talking to each other. They are comparing experiences. They are realizing that what they went through wasn't normal. And once that realization hits, it's almost impossible to go back, because silence only works when people feel alone. And right now, they don't. That's why this situation is escalating so quickly. Because it's no longer just about statements or reactions. It's about cooperation. There are increasing signs that people connected to the family are speaking with investigators, not publicly, not loudly, but quietly and seriously. And that kind of movement, it doesn't happen unless something significant is being looked at, because when multiple accounts begin to line up, law enforcement doesn't just ignore it. They start asking bigger questions. They start looking for connections, timelines, patterns, consistency. And if those pieces start fitting together, this becomes something very different, something much harder to contain, because now, it's not about managing public opinion. It's about answering to something far more serious. And that's where the pressure starts building, not just on Joseph, but on everyone connected to the system around him, especially the person who built that system. Because if it's proven that certain behaviors were ignored, enabled, or even quietly covered up, then the narrative completely shifts from individual actions to responsibility at the top. And that's the scenario that changes everything, because for decades, Jim Bob's strength came from control of information, control of money, control of people, but control only works when the structure stays intact. And right now, that structure is breaking. You can see it in the way the family is responding. No longer unified, no longer consistent. Some are speaking out, some are staying silent, and some are still trying to defend what's happening. But the more divided it becomes, the harder it is to hold everything together, because once doubt enters the picture, it spreads. And right now, doubt is everywhere, inside the family, outside the family, and now, potentially inside investigations. And that's when things start to move fast, because situations like this don't collapse slowly forever. At some point, they reach a tipping point, where too many people know too much, where too many stories match, where too many questions don't have simple answers anymore. And when that moment comes, everything that was hidden starts coming out all at once. And the most unsettling part, we might be closer to that moment than anyone realizes. Because this isn't just about what's already been revealed. It's about what hasn't been revealed yet, or what's still being held back, what people are only just starting to talk about now. And if even a fraction of that turns out to be true, then this situation isn't just serious. It's explosive. Because it would mean that for years, what the public saw was only a small part of a much bigger reality. A reality that was controlled, managed, and carefully hidden from view, but not anymore, because now, the control is slipping, the silence is breaking, and the people who once had no voice are starting to use it. And once that happens, there's no going back, only forward, toward whatever truth is still waiting to come out. And this is where everything starts falling apart, not slowly, not quietly, but right in front of everyone. For years, Jim Bob Duggar controlled the story, what people saw, what people believed, even what his own family was allowed to say. And as long as that control stayed intact, nothing could truly touch him. But now, the narrative is shifting. From individual actions to responsibility at the top. And that's the scenario that changes everything, because that control is slipping. Because the biggest thing he relied on was fear of speaking out, fear of breaking loyalty, fear of what would happen if the truth came out. But that fear, it's disappearing. And once fear is gone, control goes with it. That's exactly what we're seeing right now. People who stayed silent for years are finally speaking, not carefully, not indirectly, but openly, and every new voice adds pressure because now it's not just one story, it's multiple. And when those stories start matching, they become impossible to ignore. That's when everything changes, because this stops being just about Joseph and starts becoming about something much bigger, the system behind it, the environment that allowed it, and the person who controlled it. Because when patterns start pointing in one direction, the focus always shifts to the top, and right now, that's exactly where it's going. The image that was built over decades is breaking fast, and the more it breaks, the harder it becomes to hold anything together. Different family members, different reactions, different versions of the same story, that kind of division. It exposes everything, because the truth doesn't stay hidden in chaos. It comes out piece by piece, until there's too much to deny, and that's where this is heading. Not just more questions, but real accountability, the kind that can't be controlled, the kind that forces answers, because at this point, it's no longer about protecting an image. It's about facing what's been hidden. And the most unsettling part, we still haven't seen everything yet, because if what's already coming out is this serious, then what's still hidden could be even bigger. And once it starts coming out, there's no stopping it. Only one direction left: forward, into the truth, no matter how damaging it is.